Hey everybody, I'm Jack Reeder with Future Pastimes, and in this video I wanted to do a recap and some analysis of the Dune Tabletop Discord Invitational game that we played yesterday on Tabletop Simulator. It was hosted by Jaded, who's a member of that Discord, also a playtester, and I played in that game along with Greg Alaka, one of the Future Pastimes team, and 3 other members of the Dune Tabletop Discord, who are all also playtesters on Expansion 3. And it was a showcase of Expansion 3, so we used everything from that expansion. The new factions, we used the Discovery tokens with their accompanying Spice cards, we used Nexus cards, and we used Homeworlds. It was a really fun game to play. So I was in the game, we dealt everyone 2 factions, and then you picked one of the factions to play. So I was Bene Gesserit. We also had in that game, of course, Ekaz, which was Jaded. GJ chose the Fremen. Greg Alaka was the Harkonnen. Malister was Moritani, and Tautramus chose Riches. So I did a turn 5 prediction for Ekaz, which did not prove to be true, although it wasn't far off. I would have to say that the homeworld that I felt had the biggest impact on the game was my own. So the high threshold effect for Wallach 9 is when sending spiritual advisors to the polar sink as a part of another faction shipment, I can send 2. Now that's for my high threshold, which is when I have 11 to 20 of my Bene Gesserit forces on Wallach 9. Once I'm down to 10 or fewer, then I'm at low threshold, and my penalty is I can no longer send spiritual advisors. So that is something that you have to really weigh when you're using this homeworld. But for me, what it meant was I was able to put pretty sizable force in the polar sink very quickly. By turn 2, I had 8 forces in the sink. And what that ultimately meant was that, the early game Harkonnen, they started in Carthag, they reinforced it, and then they split their forces between Carthag and Arakeen so that they were controlling both cities. But I had drawn Fade Rautha as my traitor. I'd also drawn Stilgar, and I was tempted to keep him, but I felt like it's better to have an insurance against the Harkonnen. So I took advantage of that. I goaded Greg into some battles. I moved a huge force into Arakeen, where he had a lot of forces as well. And in that battle, which was fairly early in the game, if I recall correctly, it was turn 2, 3 at the most, but I think it was turn 2. I went for it, and even though he had bribed Moritani to play a Karama to stop the voice, I still he played Fade, so I called the traitor. And my leader in that particular battle, which was Lady Fenring, was not a traitor, so I got to use her again in the battle for Carthag, which at that point, the Harkonnen had lost their weapon and defense, so I was able to easily win the second battle as well. So I controlled Carthag and Arakeen for most of that game. I ended up being terrorized by the Moritani. They kept putting terror tokens in those 2 cities, and I was afraid that one of them was atomic, so I kept, moving forces out so that I wouldn't have to suffer such a big loss. And at one point, they had managed to put 2 terror tokens in Carthag, where they remained for the whole game. The terror tokens were especially effective, and this is one of the things Moritani can do at the end of each game turn. They can put a terror token face down so nobody else knows what its effects are in a stronghold. And normally it's got to be a stronghold that doesn't have one, but the more tiny homeworld gives them more that they can do. So that had some impact as well. It made people, it really corralled us. It made people afraid to go add forces into those strongholds because they were worried about triggering something. Only one ended up being triggered, and it was in turn 7, which was the last turn of the game, and it was triggered by me. So at that point I was allied with ECAS, and we were trying to get ourselves co-occupied in 3 strongholds. So on my turn, I went early in the shipping and movement, and I was landing one force into Habanya with the couple of ECAS forces that were there. And there was a terror token, and it was the sabotage one, which meant that I lost one of my treachery cards. I had a pretty good hand of treachery cards for most of that game. And I lost a shield, which I was not happy about, but it ended up not mattering. So that was the only terror token that we triggered. The others were on there just keeping people out and at bay, which in a way also helped us to win because other players just weren't interested in coming in and picking fights with us where the terror tokens were. So that was an interesting twist. The Mauritani were very impactful, but we managed to find a way to work around it. And part of it is when they get to low threshold on Grumman, which is their homeworld, you don't trigger a terror token unless 3 or more forces enter that stronghold. So it is a little bit of a handicap for them. I think that the other impactful thing that homeworlds had is that when you are at low threshold, and this is true for all of the factions, your free revival is increased by 1, and your Chome Charity is increased by 1, which means that if you are collecting Chome Charity, you get 1 more. And it doesn't mean that if you have 2 spice, you will get 1, because if you have 2 spice, you don't collect Chome Charity. But if you have 0 or 1 spice, you're going to get an extra 1 out, so you'll end up getting 3. And the Bene Gesserit, of course, they collect Chome Charity every turn. So when I did end up getting onto low threshold, because I had used the high threshold ability to stockpile spiritual advisors in the sink, I was able to increase my income by 1, which is a nice trade-off. And that low threshold, even though Harkonnen, they got devastated in that turn, their free revival was now at 3 forces, so they were able to get their forces back up quickly. And they were on Chome Charity for a number of turns, so getting an extra spice takes a little bit of the sting out of things. So, and in fact, a number of players, Mauritania lost a couple of battles, and then they got wiped out by Sandworm. And so they had a lot of forces in there, but they would dip down, Richess as well. They said, look, there's an advantage to being at low threshold. You get a lot of your forces off of your reserves, hopefully on the planet, but sometimes there's a sizable number in the tanks as well. But you're getting that extra income if you're on Chome Charity, and you're getting that extra revival, which is nice. So I think it's a good addition to the homeworld effect. And it really makes going forward and not winning less painful, because there can be quite a gap in you trying to recover from such a loss. Because usually you're also out some treachery cards if you've gone for the win and didn't get there. The other thing that I thought had a really big impact on that game were the Nexus cards. So the Nexus cards are cards that you get if a Nexus has occurred in the Spice Blow Nexus phase, and at the end of the Nexus, there's at least 1 alliance. Any player who's not an alliance can draw a Nexus card, which gives you a secret one-shot effect that can either be like being allied with one of the factions that is not in the game, or a Karama effect against a faction that is in the game, or an enhancement to one of your own advantages. So it just depends on which of those Nexus cards you get. Well, because of it, we had a Nexus on turn 2, but not everybody wanted to jump into an alliance because a lot of the players wanted to get the Nexus card. And that was true for a lot of turns. So there was really only one alliance for most of that game. And I think the first time, I think the Moritani and the Richess did form an alliance. And then we had another Nexus, and they broke their alliance, but then they ended up forming it again using the Moritani enemy of my enemy advantage, which lets them, instead of triggering a terror token, you form an alliance with that faction. And they were threatening for a while. I was definitely worried about the Moritani Richess alliance. The Richess homeworld, what it does is when they're at high threshold, when they're shipping a no-field token, they can also ship additional forces, and that can be very effective. They did manage to boot me out of Arakeen at one point. They came in full bore with a no-field token and several forces, and I knew that it wasn't the 0 no-field, so it could only be the 3 or the 5, and I was guessing it was probably the 5. And I suspected, because they were coming in with so many forces, that they might have artillery strike, which lets them win simply by dialing higher. Turns out they didn't. They actually had Poison Tooth, which was the other thing I was thinking might be the case, although they didn't end up using it. So I basically sacrificed Alia and figured, all right, I'm going to lose that one. But again, I was at low threshold, so I was going to get 2 forces out for free in Revival, and I was going to get the extra spice for Chome Charity. So it did mitigate that effect, and I was able to get back into the game in pretty short order. But it just meant that Richess was really able to bring sizable numbers to bear when they wanted to. And of course, Moritani was safely ensconced in Tabor because they had the terror token there. And they did manage to pick up some treachery cards. Speaking of treachery cards, one of the other things that we had in there were the discovery tokens. So the first discovery token that was on the board was a smuggler token, and I, as the Bene Gesserit, managed to get there and was the only one in the territory at the end of the round, so I got to reveal it, and it was a free treachery card, and that was when I got my poison weapon. So I started the game with a shield, and then I got a snooper in the first bidding round, and then I picked up that poison weapon very early on. So that was very effective. Bene Gesserit with both types of defenses and a weapon are quite formidable, and that was what convinced me to go after the Harkonnen. We eventually revealed the shrine, which the ECAS faction occupied. And they didn't do anything with it for a while, but then at the end they used the Truth Trance as a Karama to get a free treachery card, which helped to bolster their position. They also managed to pick up the Ornithopter, although they never ended up using it. And we did have the Jakaruda Siege, but it was unrevealed. It was in Garakulan, and it didn't end up being revealed because the game was over. So, but having them on the board was interesting because it gave us additional options. There was stuff to fight over. ECAS did end up fighting the Fremen for that Ornithopter. And so, yeah, it was a really interesting game. I'm horribly biased as the designer of this expansion, but I really love what it brought to the game. I just liked the new faction advantages. Moritani picked a fight with me early on because they had Reverend Mother Romalo as a traitor card. I did not reveal Reverend Mother Romalo in that battle. I revealed Lady Fenring again. So he assassinated Romalo, which is something he can do. So he can reveal his traitor card and say, yeah, I'm assassinating them, and he got the 5 spice for that. But what it meant was that he then puts that card face up in front of him, and he'll get a new traitor card at the end of the round. But it means he cannot ever assassinate another Bene Gesserit leader for the rest of the game. It also meant that Reverend Mother Ramallo, that trader card its location was well known, and I ended up getting a Tleilaxu Gola card, so I got her right out of the tanks, which is a safe leader, so I could continue to harass Harkonnen or anyone else with a completely safe leader. So it was a dual-edged sword though, but I loved that extra effect that was in the game with that. The ECAS were using their ambassadors, and so the ambassadors triggered similar to how the terror tokens are triggered, but you're less terrified of doing so. So I ended up giving the ECAS player the benefit. I think I triggered the Emperor's token so that they could get 5 spice. But it meant I could move over to a spice blow and collect spice that way. So it was a little bit of a trade-off, and they ended up getting several of their ambassadors triggered. But it had an interesting effect on. It can corral players as well. So you're like, all right, do I really want to go there and trigger that effect? Maybe I'll go somewhere else. And when you have the discovery tokens on there, then you do have options of maybe going somewhere else. But sometimes it doesn't really have much of an impact because it's well placed. Like, oh, the ECAS they put the right ambassador at the right location, knowing that it's going to get triggered because of its strategic location. So I love that effect on there. The Nexus cards, like I said, they did have an impact on whether alliances were formed and who formed them. And at some point we were like, all right, we gotta form up. So ECAS was like, let's form the alliance. This was around turn 6, I think, where they said, yeah, let's do it. And so we were allied for 2 turns and went for it on the second turn. And it was largely because part of it was because ECAS was going last. It was just situation of the board, how many forces people had to bear, who wanted to pick a fight with the Bene Gesserit, or ECAS knowing that they would have the voice as well. So all of those played into it, but what ended up happening was we were uncontested in 3 strongholds, but we were co-occupied, and the ECAS occupy advantage has a special clause that if you and your ally are co-occupied in 3 strongholds, then you win. You don't need to be in 4 strongholds if you're co-occupied. It's like being in 6 strongholds between you, but it's the same one. So part of it was just they didn't notice on there, and that could be a criticism of having all of these variants in the game. It's more to keep track of. I know that Greg would agree with that. But certainly Jaded and I both noticed that, and we kept it quiet. But some of it was just we took advantage. It was the right time to do it, just because so many of the other players they were not prepared to deal with us. So and it was just like where the Fremen were, they couldn't get to the right stronghold in time to contest us. So that ended up being a bloodless victory for us after a lot of blood was shed, but still highly satisfying for me. So no complaints. So that video was recorded. I was going to record it as well, but I had some technical difficulties, so I ended up scrapping the recording. But I will, once I get the link for it, I will add the link in the description. You can watch that playthrough. It was not the longest game, even though we went 7 turns. Part of it is that the Krell mod there for that edition of Dune has a lot of nice little features that can speed things up. So the bidding goes much faster, and we use the timers in shipping and movement just to keep ourselves on our toes. And so that helps as well. And just, it's players who are all familiar with the expansion. We're all longtime Dune players, so that can speed things up a little bit. Sometimes it slows things way down. People who know what they're doing, they're trying to do the math on everything. But yeah, check that out, and let me know your thoughts, any questions you have on that. And thanks for watching. We'll see you again.